So can people sin in heaven? Why or why not?
I think the answer to that is a definitive no. We are told that there will be no more suffering, no more sorrow. And I think that no more death. Okay. Well, we know the wages of sin is death. So if there was sin, there would be death. So
Okay. So that's what we call spiritual calculus. When you try and pull out different ideas from different passages, a lot of the Christian theology is guessing and trying to pull out meaning as opposed to meaning being plain. So wages of sin is death. There's no death in heaven, so therefore there could be no sin in heaven. Reasonable assumption. And the question for me is, do we have free will in heaven if we can't sin in heaven? Because that's just a strange concept if we try and marry lack of sin with free will, since the answering to why is there sin on earth is that God needed us to have free will so that we could properly love him. Let's see if he tries to consolidate any of those ideas.
promise of no more death is effectively a promise of no more sin. In addition to that, we are presently, if we know Jesus, we are covered in the righteousness of Christ. And
Yeah, which is actually what I was talking about with Mike there. Whatever sins we're doing, it doesn't really matter if we do one sin or a million sins here. If you're a Christian, just Jesus covers it. One sin is equally guilty as a million sins according to the Bible. So boom, we're covered by Jesus.
we are being sanctified, hopefully, in our lives. But one day we will be glorified. Glorified is the point at which we will fully embrace, we would no more be prone to sin as glorified people than Christ himself is prone to sin.
Now, Jesus is a divine being. Jesus is God. As far as we know, there are actually no created beings at this point that are not prone to sin. So we know about, for example, angels and demons. Those are clearly prone to sin because some of them left. Satan and Lucifer and his third of the angels. But at some point, those fell or were at least capable of falling. We know humans could fall. Wow, okay. Created beings are going to, at that point, just be divine. I'm not sure that that's correct, but let's go with it.
He is not. And the way that one scholar put it, Paul Helm, is that once we are with Jesus, we will no longer sin, we will no longer want to sin, and we will no longer want to sin. And
Once we're with Jesus, we will no longer sin, we'll no longer want to sin, and we no longer want to sin. So if that was an option, that God could create beings that no longer want to sin, the question is, why didn't God create humans in the first place to not want to sin? Good question, right? What is this all for? If there is a state that humans can have where they don't want to sin.
that makes perfect sense because I think
No, it does not. It does not make, I mean, it's a concept that's coherent that you don't want to sin, but it's not compatible with what we know about our lives here on earth, about the story of the original sin and this whole concept of redemption.
well, there was temptation in that perfect place, Eden. So can't there be temptation in that perfect place in heaven? And I
What's your answer?
think the answer to that is no, because
Okay, so he is bringing up a good objection. So the earth, we are told, was created perfect. The Garden of Eden was perfect, and Adam and Eve were there, and they were going to live forever. There was no one had sinned. It was all great, and yet there was temptation. So if heaven is the same situation as the Garden of Eden, but just without these temptations, why couldn't God have originally created the earth under such conditions that there was no temptations? That doesn't thwart free will, right? So if my free will is to flap my wings and fly around this room, but I don't actually have wings, then it's not something I can do. So it's not, is it really a temptation? Not really. That's probably a poor example. But again, why couldn't this is just more begging the question, why couldn't Eden have been the place without temptation if heaven can be? What is different?
now we see through sin. I mean, Adam and Eve didn't. They didn't get it. They were deceived. We know what sin is. Sin.
Okay. So those of you who are super familiar with the Genesis story will know that the fruit that Eve ate in the story is tree from the fruit of knowledge of good and evil. There was also a tree of life that was separate, but there's a knowledge of good and evil was the sin. And now Randy here is saying that because we have sinned and know what sin is, we are better equipped not to sin than the sinless person was. If you can make any of this make sense and be coherent, let me know in the chat and in the comments, because, wow, the delineation between one place and the other and why couldn't the first place have been done correctly, baffling.
Been there, done that, never want to do it again. It is all misery and no happiness. So even if Satan was there, which he will not be, he'll be in the lake of fire forever. But even if we could hear his voice, we would not be fooled by him.
So the question then is, why didn't God make Adam and Eve such that they wouldn't be fooled by him, or give them enough knowledge to at least be able to recognize lies? Again, this doesn't make any sense, at least not to me.
I think it's really helpful to make the point you were hinting at between external temptation is gone in heaven and our internal natures are transformed by the glory of Christ.
Okay, external temptation is not there in heaven. So I gave the possibly lame example of me wanting to fly around the room, but it's not something I can possibly do, so therefore it doesn't enter my mind as something I should want to do. Are we saying that in heaven there's no external temptation? That doesn't make any sense when you talk about some people in heaven will have greater rewards than others. That's also clear in the Bible, right? More crowns, bigger castle, all those kind of things. Some people seated at the right, some people seated at the left. Are those not external temptations? Any differentiation, any kind of class structure, is that not an external temptation to be jealous, to be envious, to want more? And on the flip side, those can garner possibly positive ambition. Is there really nothing in heaven that differentiates one person from another? So are we ourselves in heaven? Are we individuals who have different levels of crowns, different levels of responsibility, different levels of work? You know, some people say that heaven actually will be here on earth again, the second earth, and we'll have stuff to do. Again, how can you possibly have things happening and not have any external stimuli for potential sin, be it even just the sin of jealousy or laziness or envy, any of those kind of things? There's, and maybe not lust. Who knows what our sexual lives will be like in heaven? No one knows. But again, will there not be beauty? And will we not be tempted to linger too long one place, or maybe to want to be closer to God than someone else? Again, it's not a coherent notion that there can be no external stimuli for sin. And then he says, but also internally, we will not want to. We just won't want to. Just God accept, we won't want to. Well, at what point are we still ourselves then in heaven, right? Because I am an ambitious fellow, and I am also a fellow who is driven a lot by what I see someone else achieve, because I'm a competitive person. And that's a lot of what defines me. So if I go to heaven, am I stripped then of my competitive nature? Because my competitive nature requires that I do some sort of comparison with other people so that I know where I am in the grouping. And if you strip that from me, how many things do you strip away from me and my desires and wants that I'm not even the same person anymore? We're not even talking about now the whole impossibility of, can a mother enjoy heaven if her child isn't there, or a father enjoy heaven if their child isn't there? What have you done to me to make me not care anymore and be happy that they're burning in fire? These are all just, to me, huge contradictions that this conversation is doing nothing to address.
And so now that we see not with a glass darkly, but understand what we consider the smallest sin and how devastating it is, the lure is gone. And we would...
The lure is gone. The lure is gone. The idea that, oh, well, sin is no longer appealing to me. You have to make it absolute zero, because if it's 0.0001% chance, someone in heaven is going to do it, right? There's going to be millions, if not billions of people in heaven. Someone, if there's even the slightest chance, is going to want to sin. So you can't just wave it away as, we're just not going to want to, right? The fact that Satan exists and the fact that Satan fell, the angels were in heaven and Lucifer got jealous. And there's nothing about that place. There's nothing about full knowledge of God. You can't tell me the angels don't have full knowledge of God. There's nothing about all that stuff that makes us immune from rebellion and from going our own way and wanting to sin. This is all just gibberish.
Absolutely.
No more do it than I'd walk outside and chop my arm off. Like, why on earth would I do that? I wouldn't. And it's even magnified 1,000,000 times.
Okay. So because something's harmful to do, we wouldn't do it. So again, humans are known for doing things on the regular that harms other people, but also harms ourselves. We eat foods that we shouldn't. We imbibe liquids or substances that we know are going to harm us in some sort of way. We have knowledge about things we should or shouldn't do for our own well-being. We know we should study. We know we should exercise. All these things that we know we should do, and we don't do them. Or we do actively do things that we jump out of airplanes and we drive on the road. We know that we could possibly be hurt. These are all things that we do that possibly could harm ourselves. So Sean's idea that perfect knowledge about what's good or bad for us has nothing to do with whether we are capable of sinning. It's great that we would have perfect knowledge. But if we have free will, you have to, by definition, be able to choose to do something against our own self-interests. Now, Sean interestingly talked about I choose not to go outside and cut my arm off because I know that would be bad. So some of you may know that several years ago, I was a cancer patient and the cancer started in my hand. I normally try and hide my hand. We're going to get you see some of my scars. See some of my scars today. Fortunately, you can't see them that well in this lighting, but I nearly lost my arm. They told me that basically if I'd have had my cancer that I had 10 years earlier, they wouldn't even try to save it. They would have just cut it right off. I've had many reconstructive surgeries just to be able to do this again. That took 4 or 5 surgeries and several years of rehab. All that to say, that's not a sob story. That's all that to say, at least weekly, if not more often than that, the flesh that is this hand, the flesh that is this arm, feels so foreign to me because it is. They've planted parts from other parts of my bodies and there's artificial stuff in there, whatever. I get the compulsion, I get the urge to literally rip this arm off. And I can barely stop myself from going and chopping my own arm off. It is an actual thing. I know that there's actually mental illness where people can, again, want to hurt themselves. I do stop myself from doing it because I understand that this weird foreign arm that they built for me is better than not having an arm. So I do stop myself. But Sean's claim was that because I have that knowledge that it's bad for me, I should never want to do it. That does not ring true for my life at all. I want to harm myself in this way all the time. So what's changing about us in heaven exactly? This perfect knowledge about what's good for us and what's bad for us. Again, you'd have to say, hey, what's good and what's bad? Good. You were listening. Like it doesn't solve this problem.
In heaven.
Right. And sin is not just wrong. Sin is stupid. Sin is self-destructive. So when you have a complete awareness and you've experienced the destruction of sin in your life, and haven't we all experienced that in this life? Every redeemed person is a sinner saved by grace who still struggles with temptations and sins until we go home to be with the Lord. Why would we choose? You could say Adam and Eve are like they didn't know better. Well, they should have obeyed God anyway. Well, we know that.
Yeah, Adam and Eve didn't know better. They didn't have the knowledge of what was good and evil. And let me just insert here that Shannon Q's new crusade recently, because Adam and Eve didn't know better, how can it be also simultaneously true that God wrote morality on our hearts, as Romans 1 suggests? How can those two competing ideas be true at the same time? Adam and Eve, who are perfect people, didn't know anything about right and wrong, but we sinful people all have God's law written specifically on our hearts. How can those competing ideas be true at the same time? That's a tangent, but it's just something we've been discussing in our household here. So there we go. Anyway, let's carry on.
Better, and we will always know better. I actually think Satan knows better, and now all he's trying to do is pull us down because...
So Satan brings up an excellent point here, right? So Satan, as I mentioned earlier, was in heaven, the same heaven that we're going to, had perfect knowledge of God, the same perfect knowledge that we're going to have, and yet rebelled. Same situation, same knowledge set, was capable of rebelling. So what piece of free will is God's going to strip from us that we will be less likely to sin than Satan was, than the angels were? And at that point, is that even us? Why create us here? Why let us go through this sanctification process that he talked about, rather than being transformed later? But this whole idea, why improve us? What enterprise are we fulfilling here other than separating which humans would or wouldn't accept Jesus? We're not building character because clearly God is changing our character when we get there. And if all the earth is to do is a big Harry Potter sorting hat to tell us who's going to go in Slytherin, who's going into Hufflepuff, I think those are houses in the Harry Potter thing. If it's just a sorting hat, why couldn't, again, God only create the ones that were going to accept him? You're not limiting free will. Just don't create the non-accepting people. Put them all straight in that bliss and avoid all of this. What do we need any of this for if God's going to strip it away and make us not care about things that we care about now? I don't get it.
He doesn't want us to go to that place and live forever with Jesus that he was a victim. I think he has, I read the Scrutier letters and you see the way Lewis portrays it, of this hatred for these slimy little sludge bags, human beings. And they're going to celebrate and live forever in the place that he gave up and instead embraced eternal misery.
All right. That was the end of the clip. He ended there with his accusing Satan of wanting to pull us all in because he hates humans, because he's envious of that we are going to be in the heaven that he left, that he chose to leave. Again, we've been discussing that all day long here in the stream. He's going to be so envious that we get to go back there that he hates us. Not actually fine. I feel like that might fit with the story. My view on Satan, though, was actually so much that he hates God. I don't think Satan cares about humans at all. And in fact, if you read the Bible carefully, you know that Satan has very little influence. Satan, the individual being, Lucifer, if that being exists, he's not omniscient. He's not omnipotent. He can't be everywhere at once. He's very limited in his powers. All that to say, I think he just hates God. When I was a Christian, I just think that he hated God, and that what would hurt God the most, again, if you want to hurt someone, you find the thing that they love the most and you try and affect that. The thing that God in the story loves the most is we humans, and so Satan's trying to just have as few of us there as possible. Again, God being infinitely happy, I don't know how having some of the finite people gone can change his infinite happiness, but whatever. That's a minor point.